Clayton Morse woke before dawn that October morning, same as he'd done for 40 years. The air held that high desert chill that made a man's breath steam. He'd come to Silas Drummond's place to look at breeding stallions. $800 for good stock wasn't nothing. But Clayton had the money, and his ranch needed the horses. The property looked ordinary enough when he arrived. Worn house, faded barn. Drummond met him in the yard, nervous as a cat in a room full of rockers, kept glancing towards the barn, like something waited there he didn't want seen. Clayton heard it when the wind shifted. Faint sound, human sound, whimpering. He walked to the barn before Drummond could object, pushed the door wide, hay smell, dust hanging in the light. Then he saw her in the corner, woman sitting against the wall, iron shackle around her ankle, chain bolted to the post, her clothes torn, face hollow, legal papers scattered in the dirt beside her, water-stained and official. Clayton reached for the chain lock. Boot heel scraped behind him, rifle hammer cocked. Clayton raised both hands slow, keeping them where the man with the rifle could see. Now, I didn't come here looking for trouble, friend. The hired hand was young, maybe 25, with the kind of face that hadn't learned mercy yet. Vance Holt. Clayton recognized him from town. The rifle barrel didn't waver. Put it down, Vance. Drummond's voice came tight. He stepped into the barn, boots scraping the packed dirt. Morse is a guest. Guest who's nosing where he ain't invited, Vance said. But he lowered the hammer careful and let the rifle drop to his side. Clayton looked at the woman again. She'd pulled her knees up tight to her chest, making herself small. Her wrist showed a raw red circle where the iron had bit into flesh. A tin dipper sat in the dirt just beyond her reach, close enough to see, too far to touch. Somebody's idea of entertainment, he reckoned. Ma'am, Clayton said gentle. Can you hear me? Her eyes lifted, frightened but aware. Not the eyes of someone mad. The eyes of someone who'd learned the world was cruel and arbitrary. She don't talk much these days, Drummond said. He moved between Clayton and the woman, casual like he was blocking a view at a social. Come on outside, Mr. Morse. Let's discuss them horses you came for. Clayton didn't move. His gaze dropped to the papers scattered near her. Official seals, water-stained. He could make out a few words. 640 acres in bold ink and water rights just below. Those are private documents, Drummond said. I expect they are. Clayton turned and walked out. Vance followed close behind, rifle ready but not aimed. The morning sun felt too bright after the barn's dimness. Drummond closed the barn door, pulled a key from his vest and locked it. The sound of the bolt sliding home made Clayton's jaw tighten. Now then, Drummond said. His smile came easy, but his eyes stayed calculating. Lawyer's eyes. About those stallions? About that woman, Clayton said. Drummond's smile thinned. Family matter. Chaining family is a peculiar way to show affection. She's my wife. Drummond pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket, smoothed it open. Legal and proper. Married April 6, 1878. Witnessed and recorded. Clayton took the certificate, read it slow. The paper felt new, too new for something 6 months old. The ink had that fresh smell still, not the faded scent of aged documents. And the handwriting wavered in places like someone had copied it careful but not perfect. Rebecca Drummond, he read aloud, then looked at one of the scattered papers through the barn door's crack. That deed in there says Ashford. Her maiden name. She inherited the property after her father passed. Before we married. Drummond folded his arms. She's been unwell. Mine's not right. Judge Wickham declared her incompetent. For her own protection. Protection looks a lot like imprisonment from where I'm standing. Drummond's voice went hard. You're the wealthiest man in 3 counties, Clayton. You also got the most to lose. Bank examiner's already asking questions about your accounts. He stepped closer. One word from me to the right people, and your business gets buried in paperwork for the next 5 years. You understand? Clayton understood. Understood that Drummond was the kind of man who'd leverage anything. Understood that whatever was happening here went deeper than cruelty. This was about those papers. About property. About money. He pulled gold certificates from his inside coat pocket. $200. Small fortune. I'll hire her, he said. Employment contract. Ranch cook. You sign the papers, I pay you now. She comes with me. Drummond's eyes narrowed. That paper won't protect her from a husband's rights. Clayton brought Rebecca to town wrapped in his coat. She hadn't spoken yet, sat in the wagon beside him, hands folded in her lap, staring at nothing. He stopped at the blacksmith's first. Dutch Henriksen was the kind of man who knew things. 52 years old, arms like fence posts, and a mouth that stayed shut unless he had something worth saying. Dutch looked up from his anvil when the wagon stopped. Saw Rebecca. His face went still. Need you to look at something, Clayton said. He helped Rebecca down gentle. She moved like her bones hurt. Dutch wiped his hands on his apron and came close, keeping his movements slow and obvious. The forge heat rolled out from the open door, Smell of hot metal and coal smoke. May I? Dutch gestured to her ankle where the shackle had been. She nodded once. He knelt in the dust, examined the raw skin. His jaw worked. Livestock chain, he said quiet. 3/4 inch iron. Kind we use for bulls. He looked up at Clayton. Not for people. Never for people. How long would it take to leave marks like that? Months. Dutch stood. Her daddy died 6 months back. Maybe more. Left her the Ashford Creek property. He glanced at Rebecca, checking if she wanted him to continue. She stared at the ground, but didn't object. Drummond tried buying it 3 times while old man Ashford was alive. Offered $15,000 the last time. Ashford refused every offer. Said water shouldn't be owned by men who'd use it to choke others. $15,000. Clayton whistled soft. That much? Creek don't run dry, not even in August. Dutch's hammer rang against the anvil as he shifted his weight. Only year-round water in 50 miles. Worth the king's ransom out here. Rebecca's hands tightened on the coat. Reverend Paul Nance appeared from the general store across the street, 61 years old, white-haired, with eyes that missed nothing. He crossed to them without hurry. Miss Ashford, he said, gentle. Good to see you. Been praying. She looked at him. First real eye contact Clayton had seen her make. Thank you, she whispered, voice like rust. Your father was a good man, the Reverend continued. Died knowing you'd inherit what he built, knowing you'd honor his wishes about that water. Is there law in this town? Clayton asked. Dutch and the Reverend exchanged looks. There's a sheriff, Dutch said carefully. That ain't what I asked. The Reverend sighed. Ben Carrick wears the badge. Whether he upholds what it stands for is between him and his conscience. Clayton helped Rebecca back into the wagon. Then let's go test that conscience. The sheriff's office smelled like tobacco and old coffee. Ben Carrick sat behind his desk, boots propped up, reading a newspaper, 48 years old. Soft around the middle, badge pinned crooked. He looked up when they entered, saw Rebecca. Something crossed his face. Not surprise, recognition, maybe guilt, but it passed quick. Mr. Morse, he said. Didn't stand. What can I do for you? I'm filing charges against Silas Drummond. False imprisonment, assault, fraud. Carrick set his newspaper down slow. That's serious talk. Found this woman chained in his barn, livestock restraints, she's injured, malnourished, been held against her will for months. You got proof? Clayton gestured to Rebecca. She pulled back the coat sleeve, showed the raw wounds on her wrist and ankle. Carrick barely looked. She's his wife. Got a certificate and everything. Legal as sunrise. Legal. Clayton let the word hang. Man chains his wife in a barn. That's legal. Man has rights over his household. Especially when the woman's mind ain't sound. Carrick opened his desk drawer, pulled out a paper. Judge Wickham signed this 6 weeks ago. Declares Mrs. Rebecca Drummond dangerously insane. Authorizes her husband to provide necessary restraint for her protection and the protection of others. The door opened. Drummond walked in with 3 men in suits, lawyers. They moved like a pack. Sheriff, Drummond said pleasant. Glad you're here. I need to report a crime. Mr. Morse kidnapped my wife this morning. Removed her from my property by force and coercion. Clayton's hands curled into fists. I paid you $200. For employment services, not for removal of my legal wife from my custody. Drummond pulled out a copy of the marriage certificate, set it on the sheriff's desk. Then the court order, declaring Rebecca incompetent, then a property deed. You'll see here, she deeded the Ashford Creek property to me as part of our marriage settlement. All legal, all proper. Rebecca made a small sound, not a word, just a sound like something breaking. She never signed that, Clayton said. Her mark is right there, witnessed by Judge Wickham himself. Drummond's voice stayed calm, reasonable. The voice of a man who'd thought through every angle. Sheriff, I want Mr. Morse charged with kidnapping, and I want my wife returned to my custody immediately. Carrick stood finally, hand on his gun belt. Mr. Morse, you're interfering with a legal domestic situation. That's a crime, even for rich folks. This ain't about domestic anything. This is about land theft. Careful. Drummond leaned against the doorframe, smiled. Accusing a man of theft without evidence is slander. I could sue. And I would win. You got money, Clayton, but you also got holdings. Bank examiner's already looking into some irregularities with your accounts. Territorial governor's office gets involved. They might find all sorts of interesting things. Tax issues. Contract violations. Land disputes with the railroad. The threat landed clear. Clayton had built his fortune careful, but any business could be picked apart by hostile authorities. Enough paperwork could bury a man for years. You can't just steal a woman's inheritance, Clayton said. I didn't steal anything. I married her, legal as prayer. Drummond's eyes went cold. She signed over the property willingly. Judge witnessed it. Her father's debt to me was settled through marriage. All very tidy. Her father's debt? Owed me $3,000, borrowed it for ranch equipment, died before repayment. I could have foreclosed. Instead, I married his daughter and forgave the debt. Quite generous, actually. Rebecca's voice came out barely audible. My father never borrowed money. He paid cash for everything. Drummond didn't even look at her. The documents say otherwise. Sheriff Carrick cleared his throat. Mr. Morse, I'm going to ask you once to return Mrs. Drummond to her husband's custody. You refuse? I'll have to arrest you for kidnapping and interfering with a lawful marriage. Clayton looked at Rebecca. She'd gone pale, trembling. He looked at Drummond's satisfied face, at the lawyers, standing ready with their papers, at the sheriff's hand still resting on his gun. This wasn't law. This was a machine built to grind people up. She comes with me, Clayton said quiet. I'll face whatever charges you want to file, but she don't go back to that barn. Drummond's smile widened. Have it your way, Sheriff. Do your duty. Carrick pulled out handcuffs. Judge Harlan Petty showed up at Clayton's ranch house 4 days later, and by then, the situation had gotten clearer in some ways and muddier in others. The sheriff had arrested Clayton, posted bond at $5,000. Drummond's lawyers filed injunctions. The town banker called in a $12,000 operating loan Clayton had been carrying for 3 years. Payment demanded within 30 days. The general store owner started demanding cash only. 2 of Clayton's ranch hands rode off after Drummond offered them double wages. But Rebecca was safe. That mattered more than the rest. She stayed in the guest room. Small space with a window facing east toward the open fields. Maria, Clayton's housekeeper, tended her. Brought food, drew baths, left clean clothes folded on the bed, never pushed for conversation. Rebecca didn't speak for 3 days, ate small amounts, flinched every time she heard boot steps. Clayton made sure she could see him from the window when he worked. Stayed visible, never approached sudden, just let her watch him feed the horses, mend fence, move through the daily rhythms of ranch life. The 4th morning, he sat on the porch with coffee. Dawn light touched the hills. A meadowlark sang from the fence post. He heard the door open behind him. Soft footsteps. Rebecca stood in the doorway, wearing one of Maria's plain dresses, hair brushed clean. She looked less like a ghost now, more like a person finding her way back to herself. Why? Her voice came steadier than before. Clayton didn't turn around, kept his eyes on the horizon. Because leaving you there would have made me something I ain't. She walked to the porch rail, stood there quiet. The morning smelled like sage and earth after last night's brief rain. Drummond says I'm his wife. Paper says a lot of things. Don't make them true. The judge signed it. Said I was insane, dangerous. You seem pretty clear-headed to me. She gripped the rail, knuckles white. My father died in March. I inherited everything. The land, the water rights. Drummond came the next week with a marriage certificate. Said we'd married in February, before my father died. Said I'd forgotten because of my grief, because my mind was broken. Clayton waited, let her talk at her own pace. I told him no. Told everyone who'd listen that I'd never married him. Never even courted him. He brought a judge. A doctor. They examined me. Asked me questions. I got angry. Started yelling. That's when they said I was dangerous. Had to be restrained for my own safety. Her voice cracked. 6 months, Mr. Morse. 6 months in that barn. He'd come every week with papers. Tell me to sign. Tell me it would all be over if I just signed the land away. I wouldn't. So he'd leave. And I'd sit there with that dipper just out of reach. Clayton set his coffee cup down slow. That deed in the dirt, the water-stained one. That was your father's original? Yes. Spring flooding came through in March. Water got in the barn. Ruined some papers. That deed survived because my father used good ink. Iron gall. Doesn't run like India ink does. Clayton filed that away. You said the water rights. What's the property worth? My father always said it was priceless. Only year-round creek for 50 miles. But men like Drummond see prices on everything. She turned to look at him. He offered my father $15,000. My father refused. Said water should serve the community, not choke it. $15,000 to buy it, but worth more if you controlled it. Could charge every rancher in the territory for access, year after year. Clayton did the arithmetic in his head. 50 ranchers at $200 each annually. $10,000 a year, in perpetuity. That's why the marriage certificate, he said. Legal way to take ownership. If he'd just forged a sale, someone might have questioned it. But marriage transfer? That's standard. Rebecca nodded. And if I'm declared insane, I can't contest it. Can't testify against it. I become property transferred through marriage to a competent guardian. The sound of a horse approaching made them both turn. Judge Petty rode up the lane. 70 years old, but sitting his saddle straight, he'd been riding circuit since before statehood was even discussed. Clayton met him in the yard. They shook hands, old friends. "Heard you got yourself into something interesting," Petty said. "That's one word for it." The judge dismounted, saw Rebecca on the porch, tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She nodded, but stayed where she was. Inside, Clayton laid out the whole story, showed Petty the employment contract Drummond had signed, the receipt for $200, Rebecca's testimony, the marks on her wrists and ankles. Petty listened, asked questions, took notes. When Clayton finished, the judge sat back in his chair. The room smelled like coffee and leather and the oil Maria used on the furniture. "I need to see all the documents," Petty said. "The marriage certificate, the deed transfer, the court order declaring her incompetent. Drummond has them. I can compel their production." Petty pulled a magnifying glass from his coat pocket. "This water-stained deed you mentioned, where is it?" "Still in Drummond's barn, I expect." "We need it. Original surveys don't lie. They're recorded with the territorial clerk. I can request the original land grant from the archive. Compare the documents, see which ones use proper ink, proper seals, proper procedure." He looked at Rebecca. "But it needs to be public, a hearing, with witnesses. Otherwise, Drummond's lawyers will tie this up in appeals until kingdom come." Rebecca's face went pale. "She'd have to testify," Clayton said. "Yes." "Face him, in front of the whole town." "Yes." Petty's voice stayed gentle but firm. "I can examine the documents, I can rule on the evidence, but if she don't testify, if she don't speak her truth in open court with the community watching, then it's just my word against a sitting judge's order, and Judge Wickham's got friends in the territorial capital." Rebecca stood, walked to the window, stared out at the fields, her hands shook. "If she testifies and loses," Clayton said quiet, "Drummond legally owns her and that land forever. If she don't testify, same outcome, only way forward is through fire." Petty nodded. "That's about the size of it." The clock on the mantel ticked. A fly buzzed against the window glass. Rebecca turned around. Her voice came barely above a whisper. "When?" Reverend Nance came that evening. Found Rebecca sitting alone in the guest room, staring at her hands. The lamplight made shadows on the walls. "May I?" He gestured to the chair by the door. She nodded. He sat. Didn't speak right away. Just let the quiet settle. The house creaked. Somewhere outside, a horse nickered soft. "I'm afraid," Rebecca said finally. "I know. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back in that barn. The chain, the dark, his footsteps coming." Her breath hitched. "How do I stand in front of the whole town and say these things out loud? How do I look at him without falling apart?" The Reverend leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "The Lord is my shepherd." "You know that one?" "My father taught it to me. I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters." He paused. "Your father understood something about those words. It ain't about never being afraid. It's about walking through the fear anyway. With witnesses, with the shepherd leading. I don't feel led. I feel lost. Then let me tell you what I see." His voice stayed gentle. "I see a woman who survived 6 months of hell and didn't break, didn't sign those papers. Didn't give him what he wanted. That's not weakness, Miss Ashford. That's the strongest thing I've witnessed in 30 years of ministry." Rebecca's hands trembled in her lap. "What if I freeze? What if I can't speak when the moment comes?" "Then we'll wait until you can. Judge Petty's a patient man, and Clayton Morse ain't going anywhere." She looked up. "He's losing everything because of me, his money, his reputation. Men he's known for years won't look him in the eye anymore. And he's losing everything because Drummond's a thief and the system's rotten. You didn't cause that. You're just caught in it." The Reverend stood, moved to the window. "But here's what matters. If you speak tomorrow, if you tell the truth in daylight, with the whole town listening, you break the machine. You show that women ain't property, that water ain't something to choke people with, that the law's supposed to serve justice, not power. And if I lose, then at least you spoke. At least folks heard. Seeds get planted in strange soil sometimes, might not sprout tomorrow, but they sprout." Rebecca stood, walked to where he stood. The window showed the stars coming out over the dark hills. "I'll testify," she whispered. "Not because I'm brave, because I can't live knowing I stayed silent." The morning of the preliminary hearing arrived cold and sharp. October wind carried the smell of dust and coming winter. The courthouse sat on the main square, 2-story building, territorial flag snapping on the pole out front. By 9 o'clock, the place was packed. Every bench filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding the steps outside. Word had spread. The millionaire rancher versus the lawyer, the chained woman, the water rights worth a fortune. Gossip had turned it into spectacle. Clayton arrived with Rebecca and Judge Petty. She wore Maria's Sunday dress, navy blue, simple, her hair pinned back. She looked small walking up those courthouse steps, fragile, but she walked steady. Drummond was already inside, 3 lawyers surrounding him. Expensive suits, leather satchels full of documents. He looked confident, rested, like a man who'd already won and was just here for the formality. Judge Petty took his seat at the bench, gavelled the room to order. The sound cracked through the space like a gunshot. This preliminary hearing will determine 3 matters, Petty announced, his voice carried. First, the validity of the marriage certificate presented by Mr. Silas Drummond. Second, the mental competency of Miss Rebecca Ashford. Third, the ownership of 640 acres known as the Ashford Creek property. Drummond's lead lawyer stood. Maxwell Garrett, 50 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who charged by the word. Your Honor, before we proceed, I must object to these proceedings entirely. This is a domestic matter between a husband and wife. Mr. Clayton Morse has no legal standing. He's not family, not counsel. He's simply a wealthy interloper who— Counselor, Petty's voice went hard. I'll determine what's simple and who has standing. Sit down. Garrett sat, but he smiled, like that objection was just the opening move. Now, Petty continued, I want to see all relevant documents. Marriage certificate, deed transfer, court order regarding mental competency, land surveys, everything. Oh, Your Honor, Garrett said, standing again. We have prepared copies for your review. However, I must inform the court that this morning, my client filed an emergency injunction with Judge Wickham in the territorial capital. Clayton felt his stomach drop. Garrett continued, smooth as oil. The injunction seeks to halt these proceedings entirely on the grounds that Judge Petty has a personal relationship with the accused, Mr. Morse, which creates bias and conflict of interest. Additionally, we have filed criminal charges against Mr. Morse for kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and interference with a legal marriage. The courtroom erupted, voices overlapping, people standing. Petty gavelled hard. Order! I will have order! The sheriff stood from his seat in the back, walked down the center aisle. His face showed nothing. He stopped beside Clayton. Clayton Morse, he said loud enough for everyone to hear. You're under arrest for kidnapping and unlawful restraint. Stand up. Rebecca made a small sound. Not words, just a wounded noise. Clayton stood, kept his face calm. This is harassment, Sheriff, and you know it. I know I got a warrant signed by Judge Wickham. That's what I know. The sheriff pulled out handcuffs. The metallic click echoed through the silent courtroom. People leaned forward to watch, to see the rich man brought low. Drummond stood, addressed the crowd, his voice reasonable, concerned. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to make something clear. I hold no animosity toward Mr. Morse. I'm sure he believed he was helping, but the fact remains. Rebecca is my wife, legally married. She suffers from severe mental illness, delusions, paranoia. She believes I've imprisoned her, when in fact I've only sought to protect her from herself. He paused. Let that sink in. Morse, in his misguided compassion, has kidnapped a mentally ill woman from her lawful guardian. He's filled her head with fantasies about stolen land and conspiracy. It's tragic, really, for everyone involved. Several people in the crowd nodded. Clayton saw it happening. The narrative shifting, the rich man's arrogance, the poor sick woman, the concerned husband just trying to help. Furthermore, Drummond continued, I've learned that Mr. Morse is currently under investigation by the Territorial Bank Examiner for irregularities in his business dealings, unpaid taxes, questionable contracts with the railroad. I don't say this to attack his character, merely to illustrate that perhaps his judgment is not as sound as we all believed. More murmurs. The banker sat in the third row, nodding. The general store owner whispered to his neighbor. The postal clerk looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Judge Petty gavelled again. Mr. Drummond, you'll address the court, not the gallery. Well, of course, Your Honor. I simply want justice. I want my wife returned to my care. I want Mr. Morse to face the consequences of his actions. And I want this community to understand that wealth does not place a man above the law. The sheriff finished cuffing Clayton. Bond's set at $10,000. You'll need to post it at the territorial office. Hearings postponed, pending resolution of the injunction. How long? Clayton asked. Judge Wickham's schedule shows 3 days. Hearings set for Thursday at 9 a.m. 3 days. Clayton looked at Rebecca. She'd gone white, trembling. Drummond approached the sheriff. I want my wife returned to my custody immediately. No, Clayton said. The word came out flat, hard. You don't got to say anymore, the sheriff replied. You're under arrest. Judge Petty stood. Miss Ashford is a grown woman and a property owner. She'll stay where she chooses until this matter is resolved legally. Yeah, she's not competent to make that choice, Garrett interjected. We have a court order from Judge Wickham, who's now hearing the injunction. Conflict of interest works both ways, counselor. Petty's eyes blazed. Miss Ashford stays where she is. Anyone who attempts to remove her by force will answer to me. Drummond smiled. 3 days, then. We'll let the law decide, as it should. The crowd filed out slowly, talking, speculating. Clayton watched them go, saw how they looked at him now, not with respect, with suspicion, with the satisfaction people feel when someone powerful falls. Dutch Henriksen stayed in his seat. So did Reverend Nance. A few others scattered through the room, but most left. Most had already decided. Rebecca stood alone in the front row, small, fragile, staring at nothing. Clayton caught her eye before the sheriff let him out. Tried to tell her with his expression that this wasn't over, that he wasn't leaving her. But as the courthouse doors closed behind him, as the crowd outside pressed close to watch the millionaire rancher in handcuffs, he wondered if he'd made her situation worse instead of better. 3 days, Thursday morning. Everything would be decided then, if they made it that long. Clayton posted the $10,000 bond by noon, cost him nearly half his liquid assets. The territorial clerk counted the gold certificates twice. Didn't meet his eyes. Word had already spread. The millionaire arrested. The accusations. By the time Clayton rode back to his ranch, the damage was done. His foreman met him in the yard with bad news. 2 more hands had quit. The cattle buyer from El Paso sent a telegram canceling their fall contract. $3,500 ahead with no buyer now. But Rebecca was still safe. That was what mattered. He found her sitting by the creek that ran through his property, not the big creek she owned, just a seasonal tributary that flowed when the rains came. She had her shoes off, feet in the cold water, staring at nothing. Clayton approached slow, let his boots scuff the ground so she'd hear him coming. She looked up, eyes red. "I'm sorry," she said. "For what?" "For all of this. Your arrest, your reputation, your business." Her voice cracked. "You should have left me there." Clayton sat on a flat rock nearby, not too close, gave her space. The water burbled over smooth stones, smell of wet earth and cottonwood bark. "My wife died 12 years ago," he said. "Childbirth. Baby didn't make it neither. I spent the next decade building this ranch, making money, acquiring land. Thought that's what mattered. Having something to show for my years." He picked up a pebble, turned it in his fingers. "Then I walked into that barn and saw you chained there. Realized I'd been chained too, just different kind of chains. Chains made of comfort and safety and not causing trouble." Rebecca wrapped her arms around her knees, listening. "You ain't the one who should apologize," Clayton continued. "I should. For living in a world where men like Drummond can do what they do, and folks just look away because it's easier, because it's legal, because it don't affect them directly." He stood, walked to the water's edge, filled his tin dipper, the one he carried on his belt. "My father gave me this," he said. "Told me water's the most honest thing in creation. Can't lie, can't cheat, can't pretend to be something it ain't. Just flows where it's meant to flow." He held it out to her. Rebecca took it, drank slow, deliberate, let the water run down her chin, and didn't wipe it away. When she finished, she held the dipper in both hands. "Drummond had one like this in the barn," she whispered, "just out of reach. Every day I'd wake up thirsty and see it there, so close. He'd come sometimes and drink from it while I watched, then set it back where I couldn't touch it." Clayton felt something cold and sharp move through his chest. Not anger, something deeper. Something that made him understand why men killed. "That water's free," he said quiet. "Nobody owns it. Nobody can take it. And this," he gestured to the dipper, "this is yours now. Your father's spirit lives in things like this. In water, freely given. In land that serves instead of chokes." Rebecca stood, walked to the creek, knelt, washed her face in the cold water, slow, ritual-like. When she stood again, something had changed in her expression, still frightened, still fragile. But something else too, something like determination. "I'll testify Thursday," she said, "whatever it takes." That evening, Judge Petty came to the ranch with Dutch and Reverend Nance. They gathered in Clayton's study. Lamp oil smell, leather books lining the walls. Maria brought coffee and left them alone. Petty spread documents across the desk. "I rode to the Territorial Archive today. Got the original land survey for the Ashford property. Filed in 1869. Shows the creek boundaries. Water rights documented." He pulled out his magnifying glass. "Now look at Drummond's marriage certificate." They leaned in. The certificate looked official. Proper seals, witness signatures. "The ink's wrong," Petty said. "Territorial clerks use iron gall ink. Has a rust color. Doesn't fade. This," he tapped the marriage certificate, "this is India ink. Darker, more common. But it's what lawyers use in their offices." "So it's forged," Clayton said. "Probably. But I need proof. I need a sample of Drummond's handwriting to compare. Something documented. Something he can't deny is his. Dutch cleared his throat. He buys supplies on credit from my shop. I keep a ledger. He signs every transaction. Petty's eyes sharpened. You still have it? Every entry going back 3 years. Can you get it? Dutch nodded slow. Tonight, I'll say I'm doing inventory. Drummond don't usually come by after dark. I need more than that, Petty said. I need a handwriting expert. Someone who can testify in court that the signatures match. Someone with credentials Drummond can't dismiss. Clayton leaned back in his chair. There's a man in Santa Fe, Professor Morris, teaches at the Territorial College, does forensic document analysis for the government. I've heard judges mention him. Can you get him here by Thursday? Cost me $300 plus travel, but yes, Reverend Nance spoke up. I'll testify too, about Rebecca's character, her faith, her father's integrity. Might not be evidence in the legal sense, but it's truth. We need to prove motive, Petty said. Show why Drummond would go to these lengths. The water rights are valuable, but how valuable? Clayton did the math out loud. 50 ranchers in the territory need water access, average $200 per year. That's $10,000 annually. In perpetuity, add in future growth, railroad expansion, settlement increases. Property's worth $50,000 at minimum, maybe more. Dutch whistled soft. Man would kill for that. When man would forge documents for it, Petty corrected. And he did. We just need to prove it. He looked around the table. Thursday morning, we present the original survey, the handwriting comparison, the financial motive, Rebecca's testimony. We build a case so airtight that even Wickham's injunction can't stop it. And if Drummond's lawyers block us? Clayton asked. Then we go over their heads. Territorial governor, federal marshal. This is bigger than one corrupt judge. This is about whether law means anything at all out here. Maria knocked, entered with a telegram, handed it to Clayton. He read it. His face went still. What? Petty asked. Banker. Called in my loans. All of them. $15,000. Due Friday, day after the hearing. Clayton set the telegram down. Drummond's coordinating this. Trying to bankrupt me before we can fight. Can you pay it? Not without selling land. Which takes time, which means default, which means seizure. Clayton rubbed his face. He's good. I'll give him that. He's very good. Dutch stood. I'll get that ledger tonight. Whatever else happens, we'll have his handwriting. They filed out into the dark. Clayton stood on his porch alone, watching stars emerge over the hills. Somewhere out there, Drummond sat comfortable, planning his next move, confident in his web of lawyers and bought judges and financial pressure. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated what people would do when they saw the truth in daylight. 3 days, Thursday morning, everything would be decided then. The next morning, Clayton rode into town for supplies. The general store sat on the corner of Main Street. He'd been doing business there for 15 years. The owner, Harold Perkins, stood behind the counter when Clayton entered. The store smelled like burlap and pickle brine, and the sawdust scattered on the floor. 3 other customers browsed the shelves. They stopped talking when Clayton walked in. Morning, Harold, Clayton said. Perkins didn't return the greeting, just stared at the countertop. What can I do for you, Mr. Morse? Need 50 pounds of flour, 20 of sugar, coffee, salt, the usual. No, cash only. Clayton stopped. I've had an account here for cash only, Perkins repeated, louder. The other customers were listening now. Can't extend credit to folks with legal troubles. Bad for business. Legal troubles that are manufactured lies. Ain't for me to judge what's true or false. Just know you've been arrested. Know the bankers called in your loans. Know Drummond's lawyers filed liens against your property. Perkins finally met his eyes. You understand it's business. Nothing personal. Everything was personal, but Clayton didn't say that. Just pulled out gold certificates, paid cash, loaded his supplies in silence while the other customers whispered. Outside, he saw Drummond across the street, standing with the banker and the postal clerk. Drummond caught his eye, smiled, tipped his hat. The bank was next. Clayton had postponed this visit but couldn't any longer. Inside, the air smelled like paper and leather and the bitter scent of ambition. The banker, Chester Mills, sat behind his desk. 50 years old, soft hands, harder heart. Mr. Morse. Mills didn't stand, didn't offer his hand. I assume you received my notice. $15,000 by Friday. That's correct. I've been carrying that loan for 3 years. Never missed a payment. And we appreciate your business, but circumstances change. The bank board reviewed your situation. Given the current legal difficulties, we feel it prudent to call in outstanding obligations. Drummond's on your board. Mill's face stayed neutral. Mr. Drummond is a valued member of our financial community. His counsel is appreciated on many matters. This is orchestrated harassment. This is prudent risk management. Mills opened a file. Furthermore, we've identified some irregularities in your tax filings. The Territorial Revenue Office will be conducting an audit. We're required to report such things. Clayton's hands curled into fists under the desk. There are no irregularities. I'm sure that's true. The audit will prove it. Eventually. These things take time, of course. 6 months, maybe a year. Meanwhile, your accounts will be frozen, pending resolution. You're destroying my business. As we're protecting the bank's interests. Mills closed the file. Good day, Mr. Morse. Outside, Clayton stood in the street, felt the weight of it settling on him. Not just the money, the isolation, the way people looked away now when he passed, the way the town that had respected him for decades now treated him like a criminal. 3 more ranch hands quit that afternoon, hired by Drummond for double wages, stood in Clayton's yard and wouldn't meet his eyes when they told him, just took their pay and rode off. His foreman, Jack Holloway, stayed. 62 years old, been with Clayton since the beginning. He watched the hands leave and spat in the dust. Ain't about money, boss, Jack said quiet. It's about standing. Clayton nodded, couldn't speak past the tightness in his throat. That evening, Rebecca found him on the porch. He sat alone, watching the sun set over hills that might not be his much longer. How bad? She asked. Bad. And she sat beside him, not too close, left space between them. You could give me back. Tell Drummond you made a mistake. He'd drop the charges, return your credit. You'd survive. You wouldn't. But you would. Clayton looked at her, really looked. Saw the woman she'd been before the barn, before the chains. Saw strength there, buried but not gone. I don't want to survive by leaving people behind, he said. Wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror. Even if it cost you everything. Especially then. Midnight. 3 sharp knocks on the door woke Clayton from uneasy sleep. He grabbed his rifle, moved downstairs. Quiet, saw Dutch's silhouette through the window. He opened the door. Dutch stepped in quick, carried a leather-bound ledger under his arm. His face showed strain. Got it, Dutch said. But we got a problem. Judge Petty appeared from the guest room where he'd been staying. Still dressed, like he'd been expecting this. Show me. They gathered in the study. Dutch opened the ledger on the desk. Pages and pages of transactions, names, amounts, signatures. Drummond's signed here 43 times over 3 years, Dutch said. Every purchase on credit, tools, nails, wire. He's into me for $400 he ain't paid. Petty examined the signatures with his magnifying glass, then pulled out the marriage certificate, compared them side by side. Same hand, he murmured. Same pressure on the downstrokes. Same flourish on the capital D. He looked up, eyes sharp. This is it. This proves forgery. There's more? Dutch said. He flipped to the back of the ledger, a loose page tucked inside. Found this in his file. Bill of sale from the Mercantile in Las Cruces. Drummond bought wedding rings 6 weeks ago, after the supposed marriage in April. Why would a man buy wedding rings in September for a marriage that happened in April? Clayton felt something shift, like the first crack in a dam. Judge Petty smiled, cold, predatory. A man who will forge one document will forge others. What else did you find? Dutch pulled out more papers. Drummond owes money all over the territory. $8,000 at least. Hardware store in Santa Fe. Feed supplier in Albuquerque. Lawyer's fees in the capital. He's leveraged everything against the Ashford property. Told creditors he'd pay them once the land transfer was complete. But the land ain't his yet, Clayton said. Exactly. He's borrowed against property he don't legally own. Used the forged marriage certificate as collateral. Dutch spread the papers across the desk. Every creditor has a copy of that marriage certificate. He's committed fraud across 3 counties. Petty leaned back, fingers steepled. The trap within trap. He built his entire scheme on that one forged document, and every time he used it to borrow money, he created another piece of evidence against himself. His greed documented his crime, Clayton said. Poetry of a sort. Petty pulled out a notebook, started writing. We need to track down these creditors, get copies of the documents they have, show the pattern. Drummond didn't just forge a marriage certificate. He used it to commit systematic fraud across the territory. That's federal, Dutch said. Yes, it is. Petty's smile widened. And Judge Wickham's injunction don't mean spit to a federal marshal. Clayton felt hope flicker, small, but real. The handwriting expert arrives tomorrow from Santa Fe. If he can testify these signatures match, then we've got him. Petty closed his notebook. Drummond's smart, but he made one mistake. He was so confident in his web of corrupt judges and bought officials that he got sloppy. Left a paper trail a blind man could follow. We've got 2 days, Clayton said. Then we better use them. Petty looked at Dutch. I need you to ride to Las Cruces tomorrow. Get an affidavit from that jeweler about the wedding rings. Time and date of purchase. Description of the transaction. What about my shop? Close it. This is more important. Dutch nodded. I'll leave at dawn. And I need to find which banker holds Drummond's notes, Petty continued. If he's in debt for $8,000, somebody's carrying that paper. They'll want to know their collateral's fraudulent. Chester Mills at the Territorial Bank, Clayton said. He's on Drummond's side now. But if you tell him the collateral's forged, that Drummond can't pay, then suddenly Mills has a reason to testify against him. Petty stood. Greed's a beautiful thing sometimes. Cuts both ways. They worked through the night, making lists, planning testimony, building the case, piece by piece. By dawn, Clayton felt something he hadn't felt in days. Not victory, not yet, but the possibility of it. The possibility that truth could still win in a world built on lies. Wednesday night. The hearing was set for Thursday at 9 o'clock, less than 12 hours away. Rebecca couldn't sleep. Clayton heard her moving in the guest room, pacing, the floorboards creaking in rhythm with footsteps that wouldn't stop. He sat on the porch in the dark, listening, wanting to help but not knowing how. Around 3 in the morning, she screamed. Clayton was up and moving before the sound finished echoing. He stopped outside her door. Heard Maria's voice inside. Soothing, gentle. But Rebecca kept sobbing. Raw sounds that came from somewhere deep and broken. He stood there, hand raised, to knock, then lowered it. This wasn't his moment, wasn't his place. Maria opened the door. Her face showed concern and something else. Weariness, maybe? Or the recognition that some wounds don't heal clean. She needs you, Maria whispered. She needs you, not me. You're the one who pulled her out of that barn. You're the one she's trusting to see this through. Maria stepped aside. Clayton entered slow. Rebecca sat on the bed, knees pulled to her chest, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes wild. She looked at him but didn't seem to see him, looked through him to something else, something only she could see. He knelt a few feet away, close enough to speak soft, far enough to not crowd her. Rebecca, she blinked, focused on his face. I can't do it, she whispered. Tomorrow, I can't walk into that courtroom. I can't look at him. I can't. Her breath hitched. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there. The barn, the chain, his footsteps. The way he'd stand over me and smile, like I was a problem he was solving, like I wasn't even human. Clayton swallowed hard. Then don't. She stared at him. Don't testify, he said. The words cost him. But they needed saying. I'll fight this without you. Find another way. Your peace matters more than justice. More than land. More than anything. But he wins. Maybe. But you survive. And sometimes that's all we get. Rebecca's hands shook. She pressed them flat against her knees, trying to still them. If I don't speak, he'll do this to someone else. Next woman he wants something from. Next piece of land? Next time the law looks away because it's easier. Her voice cracked. I can't live knowing I stayed silent, knowing I had the chance to stop him and didn't take it. Even if it breaks you? She looked at him for a long time. The lamplight made shadows on her face. Outside, the pre-dawn darkness held that particular silence that comes before the world wakes. I'm already broken, she said finally. But broken things can still cut, can still draw blood when they need to. Clayton nodded slow, stood, moved to the door, stopped. My father used to say something, Rebecca continued, her voice steadier now. Said the hardest battles aren't fought with guns or fists, they're fought with words. With truth spoken when lies are easier. With standing when sitting would cost you nothing. She wiped her eyes. Tomorrow, I'm going to stand. Even if my legs shake, even if my voice breaks, I'm going to look at Drummond and tell the truth. And he's going to have to hear it. Clayton met her eyes. Saw something there he recognized. The same thing he'd felt when he cut that chain. The moment when fear becomes fuel. You're not alone, he said. I know. He left her then. Walked back to the porch, sat in the dark, and wondered if he'd done the right thing. Wondered if giving her the choice to walk away was kindness or cowardice. Wondered if justice was worth the price she'd pay for it. The sun rose slow, orange and pink touching the hills. A new day coming, whether they were ready or not. Dawn broke clear and cold. Rebecca appeared on the porch as Clayton finished his coffee. She wore the navy dress, hair pinned back, face pale but composed. I need to see them, she said. See what? The chains, the ones Dutch cut off me. Clayton nodded. Understood, without needing explanation. They rode to Dutch's blacksmith shop together. The forge wasn't lit yet. Too early. But Dutch was there. Always was. He looked up when they entered Ball, saw Rebecca's face and knew why she'd come. He went to a shelf in the back, brought down the chains, set them on the anvil. The metal looked dull in the morning light, cold, but also harmless now, just iron. Nothing more. Rebecca stepped close, reached out, touched them. Her fingers traced the links, the shackle that had circled her ankle for 6 months. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. Can I? She looked at Dutch. Can you what? Break them, for real this time. Dutch glanced at Clayton, some unspoken question passing between them. Clayton nodded. Dutch handed her a hammer, heavy, work-worn. He positioned the chain across the anvil, showed her where to strike, the weak point in the link. Hit it hard, he said. Don't hold back. Metal respects commitment. Rebecca lifted the hammer. It wavered, too heavy for her thin arms, but she set her feet, adjusted her grip, swung. The hammer glanced off, barely dented the iron. She swung again, harder. The anvil rang. The sound echoed through the shop, bright and sharp. Third time, she put everything into it, all the fear, all the anger, all the months of helplessness. The hammer came down like judgment. The chain link cracked. Not broken clean, but a cracked, damaged, weakened. Dutch stepped in. Let me finish it. No. Rebecca's voice came firm. I need to. She swung again and again, each strike ringing through the morning air, each one taking something from her, fear maybe, or giving her something, power maybe, the kind that comes from choosing to fight instead of accepting. The 7th strike broke the link clean through. The chain fell in 2 pieces on the anvil, separate now, no longer whole. Rebecca set the hammer down. Her hands trembled, but her face showed something like peace. Dutch wrapped 1 piece of the broken chain in cloth. I'll bring this to the courthouse, he said. Let Judge Petty see what kind of restraint Drummond used. Livestock iron, 3/4 inch, the kind used for bulls, not for wives, not for anyone with a soul. Rebecca picked up the other piece, the broken link, held it in her palm. For when I forget I'm free, she whispered. She put it in her pocket, turned to Clayton. I'm ready. The courthouse steps were packed by 8:30, Thursday morning. October sun climbing over the rooftops, smell of dust and tobacco and nervous sweat hanging in the air. Clayton arrived with Rebecca, Judge Petty, and Dutch. The crowd parted, not with respect, with curiosity. The kind people show when watching something that might end in blood. Inside, every bench was filled, people standing along the walls, more crowding the doorway. The room smelled like unwashed bodies and lamp oil, and the particular tension that comes before violence or verdict. Drummond sat at the front table, 3 lawyers beside him. He looked rested, confident. Wore a new suit, gray wool, expensive. His lawyers had document cases stacked high, ready for war. Rebecca's hand found Clayton's arm, gripped tight. He felt her trembling through the fabric of his coat. You don't have to, he whispered. Yes, I do. Judge Petty took his seat at the bench, gavelled the room to order. The crack echoed like a rifle shot. Conversations died. People leaned forward. This hearing will now proceed, Petty announced, his voice carried to every corner. We are here to determine the validity of documents presented by Mr. Silas Drummond regarding marriage to Miss Rebecca Ashford and subsequent property transfer of the Ashford Creek holdings. Drummond's lead lawyer, Maxwell Garrett, stood. Your Honor, before we begin, I must note for the record that my client maintains his objection to these proceedings. Judge Wickham's injunction has been stayed by order of the territorial governor pending federal investigation. Petty pulled out a telegram, read it aloud. Quote, given the serious nature of allegations regarding systematic fraud and the potential involvement of territorial officials, this matter will proceed under the supervision of Federal Marshal Cobb, who will arrive within the week. Until then, Circuit Judge Petty is authorized to conduct preliminary hearings and preserve evidence. End quote. The courtroom erupted, people talking over each other. Drummond's face went still, not shocked, but calculating, adjusting. Petty gavelled hard. Order! I will have order or I'll clear this room. Silence fell again, heavy, expectant. Now then, Petty continued, Mr. Morse, you may present your evidence. Clayton stood, pulled documents from his satchel, hands steady despite everything riding on this moment. Your Honor, I submit the original land survey for the Ashford Creek property, filed with the territorial clerk in 1869. Shows boundaries, water rights, and assessed value. He handed it up. Petty examined it with his magnifying glass. Original stamp, original ink, iron gall, properly aged. Go on. I also submit this marriage certificate presented by Mr. Drummond as proof of his union with Miss Ashford. Clayton laid it beside the survey. Note the ink. India ink. Darker, different composition. Not what territorial clerks use for official documents. Garrett stood. Objection. Mr. Morse is not a document expert. Sustained for now. But I'll note the discrepancy. Petty looked at Clayton. You have someone who can testify to this? I do. Professor James Morris from the Territorial College. Expert in forensic document analysis. He examined both documents yesterday. A man stood from the third row, 60 years old, spectacles, carried himself with academic precision. He approached the bench. Professor Morris? Petty said. You've examined these documents? I have, Your Honor, along with several other samples. Morris pulled out his own magnifying glass. The marriage certificate uses India ink manufactured by Parker Industries, common in legal offices. The territorial survey uses iron gall ink, which oxidizes over time, creating the rust color you see here. The marriage certificate is no more than 6 months old based on ink oxidation. The survey is at least 9 years old, consistent with its filing date. So the marriage certificate is recent. Extremely recent. I would estimate it was created within the last 3 months. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Drummond whispered urgently to his lawyers. Dutch stood, approached the bench, set the ledger down. Your Honor, this is my business ledger. Shows transactions with Mr. Drummond going back 3 years. He signs every purchase. Petty examined the signatures, compared them to the marriage certificate. His face hardened. Professor Morris, he said, compare these signatures to the witness signature on the marriage certificate. Morris bent over the documents, silent for a long moment, then straightened. Same hand, identical pressure patterns, same formation of the capital D, same flourish on the terminal stroke. These signatures were written by the same person, so Mr. Drummond witnessed his own marriage certificate? Or forged the witness signature entirely? The courtroom exploded again. Petty gavelled them down. Garrett was on his feet. This proves nothing. My client could have legitimately witnessed. Then where's the other witness? Petty cut him off. Certificate requires 2 witnesses. We've got Drummond's signature. Who's the second? Garrett flipped through papers. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning. Thomas Brewer, local resident. Bailiff, is Thomas Brewer in this courtroom? The bailiff scanned the crowd. No, sir. Anyone here know Thomas Brewer? Silence. Dutch spoke up. There was a Thomas Brewer. Died 2 years ago. Wagon accident. I made his coffin. The silence deepened. Sharp. Dangerous. Petty leaned forward. So the second witness is a dead man. Could be a different Thomas Brewer? Garrett tried. Could be, except I have the territorial death records right here. Petty pulled out another document. Thomas Brewer died March 1876. No other Thomas Brewers registered in this county or the 3 surrounding. And Drummond's confidence cracked. Just slightly, but visibly. Furthermore, Petty continued, I have affidavits from creditors across the territory. Hardware store in Santa Fe, feed supplier in Albuquerque, mercantile in Las Cruces. He stacked papers as he named them. Mr. Drummond borrowed $8,000 using this marriage certificate as collateral. Told each creditor he'd pay them once the Ashford property transfer was complete. That's standard business practice, Garrett objected. Borrowing against assets? Against assets he don't legally own, Petty's voice thundered. He used a forged marriage certificate to fraudulently secure loans across 3 counties. That's systematic fraud. That's federal. The door at the back opened. Chester Mills stepped in. The banker. He walked down the center aisle, face pale. Every eye followed him. Your Honor, Mills said. His voice shook. I need to testify. Drummond's face went white. Petty gestured. Approach. Mills stood before the bench. Wouldn't look at Drummond. The Territorial Bank holds $4,000 in notes from Mr. Drummond. He used the Ashford property as collateral, told us the marriage was legitimate, told us the property transfer was in process. He swallowed hard. If that collateral is fraudulent, the bank is liable. We're calling in his debt immediately. When did he secure these loans? Petty asked. Starting in May, 4 months after the supposed marriage. He needed capital to pay his other debts while waiting for the property transfer to finalize. Petty turned to Drummond. So you married Miss Ashford in April, started borrowing against her property in May, kept her chained in a barn for 6 months while you leveraged a fraud. Is that about right? Drummond said nothing. His lawyers whispered frantically. Dutch stepped forward again, unwrapped the broken chain, set it on the evidence table with a heavy clank. The sound echoed through the silent courtroom. Livestock restraint, he said. 3/4-inch iron, used for bulls, not for wives, not for human beings. Found on Miss Ashford's ankle. 6 months of wear marks. Rebecca stood. She didn't wait to be called, just stood, walked to the front. Her legs shook but held her. I never married him, she said, her voice quiet at first, then stronger. My father died in March. Silas Drummond came to me in April with that certificate. Said we'd married and I'd forgotten. Said my grief had broken my mind. I told him no. Told everyone who'd listen. So he had me declared insane, chained me, starved me, told me it would end when I signed his papers. She turned to face Drummond, looked him in the eyes. I never signed, not once, because my father taught me water should be free, and I'd rather die chained than live, knowing I betrayed that. The courtroom was silent. Petty's gavel came down. Marriage certificate is fraudulent. Property transfer is void. Miss Rebecca Ashford is the sole legal owner of the Ashford Creek Holdings. Mr. Drummond, you are under arrest for forgery, fraud, false imprisonment, and perjury. The bailiff moved toward Drummond. Handcuffs ready. Drummond stood slowly. His lawyers tried to object. Tried to file emergency motions, but the machine had broken. The web of corrupt officials and bought judges had finally snapped under the weight of too many lies. The handcuffs clicked shut. The crowd erupted as the bailiff led Drummond toward the door. Some cheered. Some sat stunned. A few looked uncomfortable, like they'd sided with the wrong man and now had to reckon with that choice. Sheriff Carrick stood near the back. His face showed nothing, but his badge caught the light as he shifted weight, and Clayton wondered if the man felt shame. Probably not. Men like that rarely did. Drummond passed Rebecca on his way out, stopped, looked at her. The handcuffs clinked softly. You'll regret this, he said, voice low, meant only for her. Rebecca reached into her pocket, pulled out the broken chain link, held it where he could see. No, she said. You will. The bailiff pulled Drummond on. The courthouse doors closed behind them. Final. Complete. Judge Petty gavelled once more. Miss Ashford, approach the bench. Rebecca walked forward. Clayton stayed in his seat. This moment was hers alone. Petty pulled out the original deed, the water-stained one from the barn, set it before her with a pen. Sign your name, he said gently. Make it official. Rebecca's hand trembled as she lifted the pen, then steadied. She signed. Rebecca Ann Ashford. Clear, deliberate. The first free signature she'd written in half a year. The clerk stamped it, pressed the territorial seal into hot wax. The smell of melted wax filled the air. Official, legal, permanent. The Ashford Creek property is hereby restored to Miss Rebecca Ashford, sole heir and rightful owner, Petty's voice carried. All fraudulent claims are void. All debts secured against this property through false pretense are canceled. He looked at the banker. Mr. Mills, your institution has no claim here. Mills nodded, relieved. The bank would lose money, but at least they wouldn't be complicit in fraud. Reverend Nance stood from his seat. Your Honor, if I may. Petty gestured permission. The Reverend walked to the front, placed his hand on the Bible used for oaths. I knew Rebecca's father for 20 years. William Ashford was a man who believed water was a gift from God, meant to be shared, not hoarded. He refused 3 offers from Drummond because he knew what would happen if that creek fell into the wrong hands. He looked at Rebecca. Your father would be proud of what you did today. Standing when it would have been easier to break. Speaking when silence would have cost you nothing. Rebecca wiped her eyes. Thank you. Dutch approached, set the broken chain on the evidence table. For the record, he said. So when federal marshals come, they know what kind of man Drummond is. People filed out slowly. Some stopped to speak to Rebecca. Quiet words. Apologies from those who'd doubted. Support from those who'd believed but stayed silent. Clayton waited. Let her have this moment with her community. Let them see her as she was now. Free, vindicated, strong. When the crowd thinned, she came to him. Stood close, but didn't touch. I need to see it, she said. See what? My land? The creek? I haven't been there since... She couldn't finish. I'll take you. 3 days later, Rebecca stood on her property for the first time as its legal owner. The land rolled out before her. 640 acres of high desert, scrub grass, cottonwoods, and, cutting through the center, the creek that made it all valuable. Water flowed clear over smooth stones. Constant, eternal. The sound of it filled the air like music. Clayton rode up behind her, dismounted, led his horse to drink. He'd been invited. She'd asked him specifically to come today. She pulled the tin dipper from her saddlebag, the one he'd given her, knelt by the creek, filled it, drank slow, let the water run down her chin, and didn't care. When she finished, she stood, walked to where Clayton waited. I had my lawyer draw up a contract, she said. Water access for your cattle. Fair price, $200 annually. 5-year term. She handed him the paper. He read it. Clean language. Clear terms. Between equals. This is generous, he said. It's fair. You risked everything for me. Lost thousands fighting Drummond. This doesn't repay that. Nothing could, but it's a start. Clayton folded the contract, put it in his pocket. Between equals, then. Between equals. She offered him the dipper. He drank. The water tasted like iron and minerals, and the earth itself tasted like freedom. He handed it back. She held it in both hands, looking at it like a talisman. My father gave me one like this when I was 8, she said. Told me water was the most honest thing in creation, couldn't be owned, couldn't be controlled, could only be shared or wasted. She looked up at him. Drummond tried to control it, tried to use it as a weapon. But water doesn't work that way. It flows where it's meant to flow. Judge Petty rode past on his way out of the territory, heading to the next circuit stop. He tipped his hat. Justice ain't always fast, Miss Ashford, but sometimes it's righteous. She waved. Watched him disappear over the hill. Dutch and Reverend Nance came by later, brought tools, offered to help build a fence, a house, whatever she needed, she accepted. Not charity, friendship, community. By evening, they'd gone. Rebecca stood alone by the creek. Clayton had ridden back to his ranch. Given her space, given her privacy, she knelt again, filled the dipper, poured the water back into the creek, watched it flow downstream, toward other ranches, other people, other lives it would sustain. The sun set orange and gold over the hills. A meadowlark sang from a fence post. The air smelled like sage and water and possibility. Rebecca took the broken chain link from her pocket, looked at it one last time, then threw it into the creek, watched the current carry it away, tumbling over rocks, disappearing into the distance. Some chains you broke with hammers, some you let the water carry off. She stood, tin dipper in hand, her land beneath her feet, her future, finally her own, free water, free land, free woman. Now that was back in '78, when the territory was still finding its bones between what was and what would be, between frontier law and civilized justice, between might making right and right making might. Clayton Morse paid off those bank loans by selling some cattle at a loss. Took him 2 years to rebuild what Drummond's harassment had cost him, but he rebuilt it clean. No debts, no compromises. Folks who'd turned their backs came around eventually. Some apologized, some didn't. Clayton treated them all the same. Fair, but not forgiving. There's a difference. Rebecca Ashford ran that property for 37 years. Never married. Didn't need to. Built a modest house by the creek. Sold water rights on her terms to every rancher who asked respectfully. Charged fair prices. Never gouged. Never refused someone in genuine need. When the drought of '93 came and men were desperate, she opened the creek to everyone. Free. Her father would have done the same. Drummond served 4 years in territorial prison for fraud. Got out in '82, moved to California, died poor and forgotten in '96. Sometimes justice is slow, but it travels. Judge Petty kept riding circuit until he was too old to sit a horse. Retired in '91. Told folks the Ashford case was the one he was proudest of. Said it proved the law could still work when good people refused to look away. Dutch ran his blacksmith shop until his hands gave out. He never did collect that $400 Drummond owed him. Said some debts weren't worth the paper they were written on. What I learned from all this, and I learned it slow, the way old men learn most things, is that a man ain't measured by what he builds or what he owns. He's measured by what he's willing to lose when someone who can't fight needs a fighter. And a woman ain't defined by what's done to her. She's defined by how she stands after the chains break. Clayton and Rebecca stayed friends until he died in '09. At his funeral, she was there. Didn't make a speech, didn't weep publicly, just set a tin dipper on his grave marker and walked away. Everybody knew what it meant. Some debts are paid in gold, some in gratitude, some in silence, and a symbol left where the dead can see it. The territory became a state in '12. By then, laws had teeth, couldn't buy judges so easy. Folks remembered cases like Rebecca's when they wrote the Constitution. Put in protections. Made it harder for men like Drummond to use paper as chains. Rebecca died in '15. Left the property to the Territorial Water Conservancy. Said water should serve everyone or it serves no one. They named the creek after her father. Ashford Creek. Still flows today. Still free. I sit here on my porch now, old enough to have seen how stories end, and I think about that autumn in '78. Think about how close it came to going the other way. How many people had to choose courage over comfort? How many small decisions added up to justice? Some things change. Water still flows. Land still endures. And every now and then, someone stands up when it costs them everything. That's how the West got civilized. Not with guns, not with gold, with people who looked at cruelty and said no, with people who risked what they had for folks who had nothing. That's all any of us can do. But Lord, ain't it enough